Okay, so the session is now being recorded. Thank you very much. Right, so this is just a few announcements. I think you can read through these announcements on your own. For those of you who have to write this first semester test, the supplementary, it has been postponed until further notice. Practical 7, we noticed that a number of people have not handed in Practical 7 yet. So please note it has been extended until this Friday. Please do include a brief description of what your project actually does, because we don't know what it does. And if you just hand us a project, we are going to find it very difficult to figure out what's going on. So if you've already incorporated a brief description of what your project does in your design, that is fine. If you haven't, please do that separately, either a brief description in a text file or handwritten description of what your program is supposed to do, and please name this file about so that the assistant knows to look for something of that sort. If they don't see it in your design, they need to see it in this file called about. And then with regards to Practical 6, we do have a few assistants who also don't have access to the internet, so we are looking up that matter, so please just be patient. All right. And then with Blackboard Collaborate, well, the idea was if you had a question, please type your question in the chat. So for now, please just put that chat in the Discord server, and we will then address the query. I'll read out the address, the question, and answer your question to the best of our ability given our current setting. All right. Yes, please mute your microphone, but you're not going to be able to in the first place because we had to disable everything. As I've said, the lectures are recorded and you can download it from Blackboard. However, for those of you who have very limited data, what we will do is we'll downscale it even further to a smaller file size, and we'll make that available for on Blackboard as well. And for those who have really limited data, we will also then take the same recording and just save the audio portion and upload that to Eve. And then please, just a reminder that you are welcome to make use of the tutors during their scheduled times on Discord. And if you want to join the Informatics 1A assisted tutorial Discord channel, the link is there. And also on that note, Mr. Maluleka, who handles the mentor groups, have sent, we'll be posting up links of the various Discord channels or Skype channels, depending on what the mentor likes. And please do attend your mentor sessions if you are eligible for it, because we would like to know that you're doing okay. And if you're not doing okay, please just drop us a line and let us know that you are, what's happening. We'll try and help you in any way we can. Okay, so the checklist for today's lecture is as follows. We're going to look at the typical semester test or exam scenario where you will be working with two different record structures. Specifically, one record structure will be inside another record structure. So we're going to go back to lecture 17's example, which was the problem concerning you, which I'm sure you're all experts in. And it's going to be an expanded version. But before we do that, in case, this 3-week break has been quite a long time and you don't quite remember, it involved you having to write a Visual Basic program that assists the University of Johannesburg in tracking all its students, specifically their student number, their surname, their initials, as well as their grade 12 marks. And we assume that there are 6 grade 12 marks for everyone, and you then calculate an average based on those grade 12 marks. And we were going to display the grade 12 marks, calculate, store, and display the averages for each of the students. Now, the expanded version, which we're going to work with today, is the one that's more realistic in the sense that you, or having passed grade 12 at some point, hopefully just last year, you had a number of subjects, and each of those subjects had a mark. But that mark came from working out the average of the grade 12 subject marks throughout the term. So if you take a look at here, this example, this is someone called Jason. You can see that these were his subjects, okay, and you can see that it was the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. So you can see that like your grade 12 report card, you had a first term, second term, third term, fourth term, and those marks then influenced your final grade 12 mark, and then you took these marks, and those marks then contributed to your final grade 12 average. Okay, so we expanded it by looking at the grade 12, and we wanted to know what subject names there were and the marks for each term of that particular grade 12 mark, as well as the final mark there of that grade 12 subject. So now we've expanded it so that we want to know what the names of the subjects are, we want to know what the marks during each term were, and we want to know, well, once you've got those term marks, you can calculate your final marks. Okay, so in the previous version, we had basically a student record structure that we created, where we were interested in knowing what the student number of the student was, the surname of the student, the initials of the student, as well as grade 12, this student's grade 12 mark 1 and grade 12 mark 2, and we did it for 6 of the student's grade 12 marks. And then we wanted to then change it to, no, let's make it a grade 12 marks array, so that we didn't have to have 6 separate single variables in the picture. And we would then also have a grade 12 average that is calculated using that array of the 6 marks. Now, this was the code from the previous lecture, lecture 17. You can see that there is my record structure, there's the student number, there's the surname, the initials, there is my dynamic array of size 6. Okay, we know there will be 6. We're not even going to ask the user to specify whether there are 6 subjects or not. However, if the question, and I'm going to tell you now, in your second semester test, you are definitely going to get dynamic arrays where the user has to tell you how many subjects there are. So please don't make any assumptions in your second semester test or in any of your practicals going forward. You will be required to ask the user how many subjects there are. But for this particular example, we are going to assume it is a fixed size. There are 6 modules, subjects. So that's why here I said there will be 6 particular values in this array, and it was the grade 12 average which we worked out. Now that was the previous version. What will happen with the expanded version in our upcoming problem? Okay, so we move on to slide 13, and in slide 13 you can see that we retain the student number, the surname, the initials, and the grade 12 average of the student. However, if we then expand it, and you can see on slide 14, we have changed it in such a way that we're interested in the grade 12 subject 1's name, as well as the grade 12 subject 2's name, as well as grade 12 subject 3 and grade 12 subject 4. All right. And then, in addition to the names of each subject, we also have the term 1, term 2, term 3, term 4 marks of the grade 12 subject 1, but also term 1, term 2, term 3, term 4 marks of subject 2, and so on for however many number of subjects there are. And in this example, we are going to say there are 6 subjects and 4 terms. But as I've said earlier, please take into consideration that you must prepare for the fact that this could very well be dynamic, and you will have to ask your user for those values. And from there, we will then have the grade 12 subject 1, subject 2, subject 3, subject 4, and so on's average. Now, in order for us to work out this average, we need to take the 4 term marks of subject 1 to get the average of subject 1. And we will need to do the same for subject 2, or 4 terms of subject 2, to get the average of grade 12 subject 2. And these averages of all the subjects will then contribute to the grade 12 average overall. Okay, now moving on to slide 19, you can see that in the previous version, because we only had one field that explained the grade 12 subject. Namely, we were just interested in the marks. We weren't interested in the names. We weren't interested in the average for that particular grade 12 mark. We then only had one field, and because it was only one field, we then just simply created an array of integer. All right. But on slide 20, if we go back to this diagram, you can see that there are multiple fields that are relating to the concept of a subject. We are interested for every single subject. We want to know what the name of the subject is. We want to know what the marks for the 4 terms of that one subject is. And we are also interested in the average of that one subject. And because of that, this is why we are talking about multiple fields as opposed to one single field. And now in the previous example, we were only interested in a single field, and that single field was of type integer. However, now for us to describe our subject, we can't just use an integer or a string or so on to describe it, because it's now a lot more complex. There is a string to represent the name. There are 4 integers to represent the 4 term marks. And then there is a double to represent the 1 average. And that is why we need to work with a structure instead. But if we didn't want to use a record structure, and this is why on slide 21, you can see that the heading says defining our structure, bad idea, in brackets, because this lines 5 to 8 is not how we want to do it. Okay, this you can see we have to then create an array for the subject names, because each student has 6 subjects. So in other words, you need to define an array of 6 different subjects. You need to define a 2-dimensional array for the grade 12 subject marks per term. And the reason for that is because the first dimension is for the 6 subjects that the student has, and the second dimension is for the 4 terms that each subject is supposed to have. All right, so it's a 2-dimensional array because it is grade 12 subject marks. So it's the marks for each of the 6 subjects for each of the term. This one is a 1-dimensional array. Grade 12 subject names is a 1-dimensional array because it is the names for each subject. On line 7, it is also a 1-dimensional array because it is the averages for each of the grade 12 marks. And then the last line here, this shouldn't really be included in the block, because this public grade 12 average actually is a single variable that doesn't relate to all 6 subjects. It actually is the grade 12 average that is calculated once you have all 6. So this is a mistake. Please note, I would quickly just change this here. I would say that the box ends there, not here. Okay, so public grade 12 average is not part of your subject description. Okay, right. So moving on, if you were to resize every single array in the question, on slide 22, you can see that in addition on line 10 to resizing the student's dynamic array, you also need to resize the 3 different arrays that happen to be part of the student's record structure, because each student has their own 6 subjects. And that is why you can see here Reading Students S dot grade 12 subject names 6 on line 16 is trying to set the size of the subject names to allocate for all 6 subjects. Now in this example, we said that the subjects is 6 and the terms are 4. Those are fixed. Therefore, I just put 6 and 4 in these various dimensions. However, in a typical second test scenario, after line 13, you will quite likely also you'll have variables asking for how many subjects there are and how many terms there are. And with those variables, you will then substitute these fixed numbers with those variables instead. Please note that in my example, NS has already been taken for number of students. So please do keep in mind that you're going to have an N something else, NSU perhaps, to represent the number of subjects. Now moving on to the next slide. Okay, let's look at our new version again. So on slide 23, you can see what I've done is I've changed the color of all the fields that relate to subjects in gray instead. So the purple are students. They still relate to a student, whereas the gray, all these gray blocks, now refer to the subject information instead. And these are describing subjects. Okay, moving on to slide 24. This idea of what we're doing with a record structure inside a record structure is actually very similar to the concept of a Lego building, like the one we see on the left here. So this is a very nice, pleasant building set, that Lego building set. You can see that this building set is made up of a detective office on the left and a barber shop on the right. So that means that this entire building is made up of two different parts. That happens to be a detective office, and this happens to be a barber shop. So it's two different complex components that are made up to put together to form one building. And each of these buildings, they themselves can be broken up further into smaller components. So if you think about these smaller components, this can be seen as your integer, your double, your string. Those are the data structures that you work with on an everyday basis, starting from the beginning of the semester. But as we progress, we started creating our data structure, and we created one only in our example. But now we're at the point where we are going to have one even more complex data structure that is made up of other data structures, and those data structures are made up of your basic primitive data types. All right. So in the new version, what we are trying to do, as seen on slide 25, is we are working with two different record structures. We've got one record structure that describes a student, and we've got one record structure which describes your subjects. And please note that your data structure describes one student, but you can use that one data structure to describe multiple students. So you take one data structure and you define it so that it describes only one student, and then you create an array of that data structure so that you can use it for multiple students, and you do the same for multiple subjects as a result. Okay, and this, ladies and gentlemen, the benefit is that it promotes reusability of both these structures in other programs. Think of the subject record structure that you're going to describe. It doesn't necessarily have to only be used in the student record structure. You could, in effect, take the subject record structure and use it elsewhere. Maybe a primary school wants to use it just to monitor all their subjects. Maybe you can use it in high school somewhere else. All right. Okay, so moving on. Now on to slide 26. On slide 26, you will see the VB code that is required for me to define my two data structures. So let's work through this briefly. You begin with the innermost record structure. What we mean by that is we work with the one structure that is a component of the other record structures. So you know that a student has a subject. Okay, in fact, a student has 6 such subjects. So you start with your private structure, and you remember it's private structure and the fields are public, and you go private structure and then you call it whatever you want. Okay, in our example here, it is a subject, so I call it a subject record, and here there's a name for that subject. So remember, each subject has one name only. Each subject has several marks depending on how many terms there are. So that is why this is a single array, a single dimension array, which is dynamic. Even though I know that there are 4 terms, we set it up in such a way that we will resize the array during our initialization. And then there is the average for that particular grade 12 mark. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is effectively that one building, one part of a building that we are going to form as a full building. All right, so here the subject record is then appearing in line 11 as subject record type. And again, we have, remember, one student has multiple subjects, has 6 actually, and so we have public subjects, open bracket, close bracket, 6. We're going to define it as 6 later, resize it as 6 later, as, and then this is very important, this is the new work you're looking at, as subject rec. And what is subject rec? Subject rec is the name of our inner record structure. So in essence, this blue line here, this blue box, is indicating that we're going to have a full building here. We're going to have a full building here, and this full building is made up of this component, which has been defined in this lines 1 to 5 previously. Then on line 15, you will notice that we only declare a dynamic array of type student rec, which is our outermost record structure. Please note, this is very important. Do not declare a separate array of type subject rec here. Okay, do not do so, and the reason why we don't do so is because subject rec is already in our student record structure. You will not have a subject record structure just lying around, not attached to any student. Every subject record belongs to some student, and that is why we keep it on line 11 instead. All right, okay, and then moving on, if we want to resize our array, this is how we would resize it instead. So when we initialize our record structure, we first find out how many students there are. We resize the student array to the number of students, and then for each student that we have in our array, we're going to first redim the students to how many subjects exist, which is at the moment 6, okay, because there are 6 subjects for every student. So we've resized that array. But remember that the subjects, remember that on the previous slide, on slide 26, on the subject rec, line 3 is also a dynamic array. So in this example, how many dimensions are we looking at here? We are looking at 3 different dimensions in the picture. There is an array inside the subject record structure. This subject record structure itself is another array, so that's 2 different dimensions we're talking about here. And then the student record structure, remember, we're not just working with one student record, we're working with multiple students, and so there is our 3rd dimension. And that is why in this example here, you can see that when we resize the array, we do resizing in 3 different places. On line 20, okay, so we know we are on slide 27 now. On line 20, there is a redim command indicating resize the outermost array. Please note, when we're defining our record structures, we define from inner record structure to the outermost record structure. But when we resize our array, we start from the outermost record structure, which in this example is the students. Students have subjects, subjects have terms. Okay, and so 20 on line 20, read students to NS, that's the number of students, and because each student has an array, we have to have a for loop that goes through each student. Resize each student's subjects array to 6, but then remember inside each subject there is a marks per term array that also needs to be resized. And so on line 23, we go through each of those 6 subjects and we read them that students is subjects SU dot marks per term to 4. Right, moving on to the next slide, which is now the recap. Just so that you know, on slide 29, the idea is you need to modularize your record structures. What we mean is if you find that there are multiple fields in your record structure which all describe the same object, so to speak, then you should rather group them as a separate record structure. Now, this does take experience to understand and get used to. So the good news is in your second semester test or in your exam, we will tell you this is record structure 1 and this is record structure 2, and in each of these record structures it must have the following fields. So you don't have to worry about whether or not something should be grouped in a different record structure or not. That will be a problem that we will look into when you get to Informatics 1B. Now that concludes this part of the lecture, and so I'm going to go to the Discord channel and I'm going to read through the questions. So if you have any questions regarding the slides for today's lecture, please type away and we are going to then answer them. All right, so please do type. I've already got one query. So the first query is, question on the current lecture, is it necessary to create a sub for initializing? Well, you can do that. I would suggest that you put the initialization code under a button click, so that once a person clicks on that particular button, tends to be at the beginning of your program. So after you've asked your user how many so and so, once they told you, listen, there are so many students, so many schools, so many terms, what you can then do is you can then write the code to initialize. But if you want to write it in a subroutine, so in other words, you write a separate subroutine where someone then resizes everything in that subroutine before returning to the rest of your initialization, you are welcome to do that. However, when you're talking about initialization, you might mean that you need to change everything to the value 0. The answer there is no. I would suggest that you initialize your totals where necessary to 0 just before you have to work out any calculations in their respective calculation. But we will go through that in the examples to come. So after we have finished working through the rest of this example where we perform other calculations, we will then proceed to cover the past semester test papers and exam papers. Okay, so then the next question I've got is, what's the danger of calling subroutines in a single button? Well, the danger there is if you have one single button and then you have a bunch of subroutines that execute one after the other, it might make your debugging a little bit more difficult. What I mean by that is these subroutines will obviously execute after another subroutine has executed. So if you've written code in such a way where now something goes wrong in your program, so you were busy doing something and it crashes at some point, but you've written your code in such a way that you can't quite figure out exactly at which point the program crashes, then it causes a bit more of an issue. Whereas if you have it as separate buttons, you can then control it in the sense that you press this button and everything worked, then you proceeded to the next button and you press that and now something crashed. So you know that the error can be isolated to the action, the particular action that you were just looking at that point. Then someone mentioned, do we mark the attendance register? No, you don't have to mark the attendance register. We do get a report at the end of the session to see who has attended. That's why we are also finding Blackboard. Well, the main reason why we're using Blackboard is we are really banking on that the university gets Blackboard 0 rated, so that this actually is less data intensive for everyone. All right. Then let's see. Under variables in the design, do you have to put the record structure variables as well? Yes, that is an excellent question. You do. You have to actually now, in your design, include a section that is called data structures, that happens before the variables, and you would draw your record structures in there. In fact, I would like to end this show. Okay, let's just discard this, and I'd like to quickly show you on a blank whiteboard how you would do your data structure. So you would draw your data structure very much like a table. All right, so there is my table, and this table should look like this. And then you would mention that this was your student. Okay, let's call it subject rec. All right, so that is the name of your record structure. And then down here, you would use a plus sign as a bullet. Don't use circle, don't use minus, use a plus sign. Don't ask us why yet. Okay, we'll tell you the answer actually is because plus means that it is public. And remember, your fields in your record structure are public. So you would probably say something like name, and you would specify that it is a string. And you would do the same for your marks per term, open bracket, and that would be an integer. And then you would also have your average of type double. And this would be an example of your one record structure that you would have to draw. Okay, and so for this particular example, today's lecture, you would actually have to draw 2 of these. One for subject rec and the other one for the student rec. And just remember that for the student rec, where you are now creating a field of type student rec, of subject rec, you're going to have to then mention that that student rec has a field of type subject rec. So you would have 2 tables in that example. All right, let's see what else. Okay, we are now, okay, I'll just scroll up because you've got all these questions. Then the next question I have is, would you be penalized for having a 2D array within a record structure? No. Okay, that's a bit of a tricky question. The immediate answer is no, you would not be penalized for having a 2D array within a record structure. You would, however, be penalized for having a 2D array within a record structure if it doesn't make sense. It really depends on your question. So in my particular example, there's no need to have a 2D array in my subject record structure because it is the marks per term. In other words, we only want to know what the marks for a student was for each of the terms. But let's say we then change the story to something really weird, and we are now interested in knowing what the marks were for each term during each year. Let's say this report card wants to record the marks over the last 3 years as well. So there are a number of years and there are terms in each year. In that case, you would then expand this particular example that we have in front to a 2-dimensional array inside the record structure. Right. Then the next question is, when initializing, if you do not know, for example, the number of students or the number of subjects, would you just read them as how you have done in this lecture example, but just with a variable that you will have declared? Yes, that is absolutely 100%. You would in my example, we don't know how many students there are. That's why I do have a variable called NS, where I ask the user how many students there are. But I do know how many subjects there are, and I do know how many terms there are, and that's why I did not declare variables for number of subjects or number of terms. All right, but otherwise your answer is 100% then. Then the next question is, exam, is it allowed to have a paper so that you can draw your interface before creating it on VB? Well, in the traditional way of having tests, we actually do give you paper so that you can draw your interface before creating it on VB, because that is part of your design. During the design process, the first 20 minutes, we do recommend that you work out your design on paper. We have found, and maybe you disagree, but we have found that students do perform better when they actually have a pen in their hand and they are writing to paper what how they envision their project to be. Right, and then on that table, we won't have to include the purpose of each variable in the struct. No, you don't have to. The idea of the record structure diagram there is, it's just meant to draw what the record structure should look like, because remember, in the next section after your record structure section in your design, you're going to have a section called variables, and in variables you are going to then list all the variables, that the global variables that you're going to use. All right. Then, would declaring the rect structure in your design be under the variable section, or is there a new section in the design document for record structure? Yes, there will be a section just before variables. It's a new section heading called record structures, and that's where you will draw these two different tables. All right, then I think this is the last question maybe in here, and that is, so our record structure is like a custom data type. That's exactly it. It is a custom data type. A record structure is a custom data type which you are now defining, because an integer or a string or a double on its own is not sufficient for your purposes here. All right. I see there are still a few more people typing their questions. All right. So let's just wait for them to finish typing their questions, because we've got 5 minutes remaining in the session. However, hopefully everyone is doing well. Please do give us feedback. Anything you're struggling with, even if it's to do with connecting, let us know. We really can't do much about it, but we can report your situation to the higher ups, and hopefully they will make a plan. Also, please note, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you are reading the notices that you get sent to you from the VC, because I know it's a lot of messages, but some of it contains really important information that is very important for you. Okay, so the next question is, yeah, I'm still waiting for questions.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that are raising your hands in the session, just please direct whatever question it is that you have to Discord. That's where all of the questions are being answered by Scott.
Would it most likely be that the semester test or the exam will have a dynamic problem? So meaning that majority of the input will be unknown, so it will mostly be dynamic. Yes. It's quite likely that you will not know what the dimensions are. So in today's example, you will be told, we don't know how many students there are, we do not know how many subjects there are, and we certainly do not know how many terms there are. Right. And then question not about this lecture, who can I contact in the department if I have issues with my modules? I think please send us a personal notice about that. I'm not sure what issues you have with your modules, but please just send me a personal message me directly, and I will try and answer your questions in that regard. I might not be able to assist you, but I can then perhaps isolate what your problem is and refer you to the correct people. Right. Will tutorials be conducted the same as this lecture? Yes, the difference is Mr. Labia is agreeing to present the tutorials. All right, and the idea is it will be smaller groups. So because it's smaller groups, you will then be able to actually type in the Blackboard Collaborate environment. You can also speak up there, and you can also collaborate on the whiteboard with us. That means please attend only your particular tutorial session. Please don't attend another session that you shouldn't, so that we can keep the numbers manageable. Okay, so what about the prac sessions on Friday? What we are going to do is we're going to run that on Discord. To my understanding, what we'll do is we will get our assistants to mark the practicals during the Friday practical sessions. And if you have any queries, Mr. Lebier and I will also be here on the chat so that you can raise any queries regarding how it was marked and so on. All right, and then if we do not declare the record structures in our design as specified today because we did not know, we were unaware, does this mean we should redo our design and upload it again? Well, preferably please try to do that so that we can give you feedback on your design, because going forward, you are required to do the design this way. All right, then in the semester test 2, if you change your mind on how you want your interface to look like or how your algorithm is after the 20 minutes allocated for design, will we still be allowed to change our designs? Yes, you may, as long as time isn't up. So if you have maybe 15 minutes before the end of the session and you decide that your program's working perfectly but your design is not 100%, you are more than welcome to go back to the design and fix it. Right, so we've got one more question, and I think after this one question I'm going to have to cut it off for the reason that you probably have another class after this. Okay, so question about prac 7. If you wrote what your program should do with your problem, is it fine, or do you have to create? No. If you do have to create a new PDF called about. Now, if it's in your design already, or if you've already put in something, please just make sure that it's easy for my assistants to find it, because if it's hiding somewhere, we won't be able to answer that question. All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to. Okay, one more question. I've used 2 record structures in my project. Is it acceptable? Yes, it's perfectly fine. We don't have an issue with it. The only thing we're worried about is, do you use the record structures correctly, and does it make sense? Please, we have to see how logical your practical 7 actually is. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to end this session. We are going to stop the recording. Mr. Lebier will do that because apparently we have reached our scheduled end time and we'll be disconnected in approximately 5 minutes. And at this time, all attendees are removed from the session. So we will continue. I will see you next lecture. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Goodbye.